And what happens in Ukraine will be closely watched by world leaders who are currently gathering in New York for the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. It is a gathering aimed to uphold multilateralism and the rule of law, both of which Russia openly challenged by invading Ukraine. Now, I don't know how many of you remember this, but an emergency United Nations Security Council meeting was underway when the first missiles were fired into Ukraine. 209 days later, world leaders are meeting in person. Setting the tone for the assembly, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the gathering is happening at a quote-unquote time of great peril. Guterres added that the world is blighted by war, battered by climate chaos. It goes without saying Ukraine will be dominating the UNGA discussions this year. But the question is, at what cost? Let me show you a headline. A journalist in Hong Kong has been charged with obstructing the police. This comes as the journalist was preparing to leave the city and begin an Oxford fellowship. The journalist was arrested on the 7th of September. What's his fault? He got into a tiff with two police officers. They wanted to see his I-card. The journalist asked the officers for their warrant cards. The journalist's name is Ronson Chan. He is the chairman of the Hong Kong Journalists Association. Was he out of place? That depends on who you ask. But one thing's for sure, this is not a one-off instance of an attack on free press in Hong Kong since the enactment of the Hong Kong security law. Last year, news platforms like Apple Daily and Stand News were forced to shut shop and their executives were charged with national security violations. Here's another headline. This one is from Myanmar. 13 people have been killed after a school was attacked by Myanmar's junta. Many among them were school children. The spokesperson of the military said the government forces were trying to clear rebel terrorists. The junta claims rebels were using children as human shields. And this is not the only attack on schools since the junta overthrew the government of Aung San Suu Kyi. These are headlines from the last 24 hours. My point is, if you zoom out of Ukraine, there is a lot happening around the world as well. There is a lot that needs urgent global attention. A lot of issues that need resolution. There are a lot of wars that the world is currently fighting, and I cannot harp on this enough. Let's come back to the example of Hong Kong and the war on press freedom. The city has dropped 68 places to 148th on the annual Press Freedom Index. I'm referring to Reporters Without Borders here. The local media in Hong Kong has seen a surge in investigations. In Myanmar, it is a war on civil rights, basic rights like the right to live. The United Nations itself has documented over 260 attacks on schools and education personnel, 260 attacks. That is since Myanmar's military ousted the government of Aung San Suu Kyi. Numbers like these cannot afford to be buried at the UNGA session because of the politicking around Ukraine. And since we are talking about numbers, here's another. 153 million tons. That is the amount of food that the European Union wastes every year. That is the amount of food that is shredded in the EU every year. And this amount is more than what it imports. This is according to a report by Feedback EU. The study says the amount of wheat wasted in the EU is equivalent to about half of Ukraine's wheat exports. Currently, the West is pointing at Russia for worsening the global food crisis, vilifying the Kremlin for forcing people to go to bed hungry. My point is, hijacking a global forum to hammer Russia will not solve the war on hunger. More than 811 million people, 811 million people go to bed hungry. That is almost 10% of the world's population. There is a need for global solutions to these wars, solutions that are applicable and sustainable. These wars also deserve space in the global discourse. They deserve dialogue at the highest multilateral forum. The biggest challenge before the 77th UNGA will be to look outside Ukraine, to not brush non-Ukraine issues under the carpet, to also focus on human rights violations outside Ukraine, say in China or Pakistan, to talk about issues that are global and not just European. And let's face it, 209 days into the Russia-Ukraine war, what has the UNGA even achieved on that front? What has it done to stop the Russian invasion? WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.